You're about to step into the charming, cozy, heartwarming world of Victorian factory life. You know the magical era when children toiled for half the day and the very air could be prosecuted as a public hazard. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment to say where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us across the globe. Now, dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first day as a Victorian factory worker begins the way most Victorian tragedies do, with a bell, not a gentle chime, to wish you good morning. No, this bell clangs like it's personally affronted you dared to sleep. It's pitch black outside. The sun has declined to show up. Even the rats are still dozing, and they pull graveyard shifts. But you must rise. You peel yourself off a straw mattress that feels as though someone angrily stuffed a burlap sack with regrets and broken glass. Your spine cracks like a door left open in a storm. Your joints send a clear message. Why are we doing this? Your breath puffs into the icy era personal cloud of despair. That's right. You're so cold, you're generating your own special effects. Breakfast. Yesterday's bread now dense enough to serve as a blunt instrument. You try to bite it, and your molars lodge a formal grievance. No butter, no jam, no coffee. Caffeine is reserved for aristocrats and foreigners. Victorian laborers powered through on pure survival instinct and simmering resentment. You dress in clothes best described as historically abrasive. Every thread feels like it was woven by someone who loathed human skin. Stiff, heavy, and reeking of every prior owner's misfortunes. You step outside, ready to greet the day and instantly regret every life choice that brought you here. The air greets you with a cocktail of soot, coal, smoke, wet fog, and something indescribable that smells suspiciously like urban sorrow. A cough echoes nearby, sounding like a haunted squeezebox. A child darts past, already late for their 12-hour shift because in Victorian England, childhood was less a stage of life and more a rumor whispered by nostalgic poets. The street is slick with an unidentifiable sludge. Your shoes, essentially cardboard lined, with optimism soak through at once. Congratulations. Your day begins with a light version of trench foot. Then the factory bell rings again, louder, this time as if your hesitation has wounded its pride. You pick up your pace, not out of eagerness, but because Victorian foremen are legally empowered to yell at you until your spirit detaches. And the worst part, you haven't even reached the factory yet. You haven't seen the machines. You haven't inhaled the dust. You haven't met the foreman, a man whose personality resembles an unseasoned boiled potato. Morning has barely begun, and you're already thinking, no, I will not survive this. I'm going back to bed. Your commute is no picturesque stroll. There's no sunrise, no birdsong, no neighbor offering cheerful greetings. Instead, you step into a street that looks like it was cut from a lost horror manuscript. The fog hangs thick enough to weigh something, the color of wet concrete, carrying the perfume of industrial progress and chronic bronchitis. The ground isn't so much a road as a stew of mud and soot. Every step risks losing a shoe. Tragic loss. Considering Victorian footwear costs 2 years' wages and offers the insulation of damp paper, you pass the local wildlife. Rats, the size of emotional support animals. They don't scurry. They don't flinch. They just stare at you like, oh, factory. Rough. Even the rats pity you on. That should tell you everything. Rows of cramped tenements pressed together, each housing entire families in a single room. They share air, diseases, and questionable decisions. Laundry sags from lines dripping onto the street. Sunlight hasn't graced this district since the reign of some long-forgotten George. Children, some no older than 5, hurry past, clutching tools. At that age today, kids are learning colors. In Victorian England, they're learning how not to get shredded by machinery. Adorable, in a way that makes your soul ache. As you draw closer to the factory, the sky darkens not from clouds, but from smoke. A man-made twilight looms overhead. Chimneys vomit black plumes like dragons nursing head colds. Within moments, your lungs feel decades older, crossing a narrow bridge. You glance down at the river, once water, now a bubbling cauldron of chemicals, dead fish, and existential remorse. Water shouldn't bubble unless it's boiling. You make a mental note. Do not fall in unless you're seeking either superpowers or immediate oblivion. And just when you think it can't get worse, the bell rings again. Metallic, merciless, dripping with disappointment. You quicken your step not from desire, but dread of the foreman's wrath. By the time you reach the factory gates, your shoes are soaked, your lungs are protesting. Your mood is subterranean, and your spirit is quietly evaporating from your ears. And this was only the commute. You haven't even started your shift. Having survived the walk of feet worthy of commemoration, you finally face the building where your dignity and posture will be permanently altered. The factory. It rises from the smog like a fortress built by someone who actively despised daylight, oxygen, and joy. Massive, grim, and somehow both abandoned and overcrowded at once. The first thing you notice isn't the sight, it's the sound, a distant, metallic roar, like a thunderstorm being beaten with kitchenware. Clanks, bangs, whirs, and the occasional shriek of a steam pipe venting not just pressure, but emotional trauma. Your ears consider resigning on the spot. The doors are iron slabs, worthy of a dungeon. You hesitate to touch them. They radiate the aura of objects that have witnessed unspeakable horrors, mostly involving fingers. Inside, you're hit by a wall of heat, noise, and grime, so dense it might as well have a lease. Dim light filters through grimy, cracked windows. Dust floats like it pays rent. Workers drift through the haze like specters with union grievances. The floor is uneven, slick with oil, metal shavings, and substances you wisely refuse to identify. Every step feels like Russian roulette played barefoot. Your first instinct, turn and fleet to another city, another century, anywhere but here. But the foreman has seen you. He's a man carved from scowls, stress, and pure Victorian gloom. His job is to glare until you speed up. He excels at it. His look says, if you even contemplate escape, I will invent new dimensions of disappointment. You glance at the machinery and instantly regret breathing. Looms, gears, belts, presses, each one enormous, deafening, and powered by steam and spite. Every machine looks one mistimed blink away from claiming a limb, and your shift hasn't even begun. Standing there, enveloped in smoke and the din of mechanical doom, you realize something profound. you do not belong here. Your modern mind whispers, nope. Your lungs whisper, goodbye. Your heart murmurs, is it too late to become a baker? But it is too late. Welcome to the factory. You might hope, on your first day, for some orientation, a friendly guide, a safety pamphlet, maybe a cheerful demonstration. But this is Victorian England. The only training you'll get is don't stand too close to things that spin. Your onboarding begins when the foreman points to a machine the size of a carriage and barks. Right, you operate that, that's it. For words, your entire education. You stare at the contraption. It stares back with menace. Somewhere inside, a voice sighs, it's been a good life. Victorian machinery is not labeled, not color-coded, no emergency stops. It's a tangle of gears, belts, pistons, and steam pipes, all hissing like mechanical llamas with grudges. Your job, keep it running smoothly, despite not knowing what half the parts do. Maybe no one does. An older worker, 3 fingers, and most of his will to live. He's your mentor. He shouts over the din, don't let your sleeve get caught, then walks off because that's the full curriculum. You nod as if that single warning could save you from the machines. 18 other murder methods. You study your coworkers. They move with speed and precision, like people who surrendered hope long ago. Grab, pull, crank, feed, push, twist it's a dance choreographed as a cautionary tale. The foreman passes again, glaring like inefficiency is a personal betrayal. He bellows, faster. Even though you still can't identify the part you're supposed to work. You'd ask questions, but curiosity marks you as new. And being new might get you assigned to the machine nicknamed the hand collector. Every second in training shortens your life. Your pulse spikes, your palms sweat, your clothes feel like death traps. Your eyes dart for TRAPDOORS. In this moment. Facing a monstrous machine armed only with anxiety and finger counting, you understand your real orientation. Don't die. Or, more accurately, don't die yet. Now that you've graduated, it's time to meet your true co-workers, the machines. These mechanical behemoths are huge, steam-driven, and empathetic as a tax collector during a drought. Modern machines beep politely and stop if you sneeze. Victorian machines operate on one principle. If it moves, crush it. If it doesn't, crush it anyway. The first time you reach toward it with trembling hands, you notice the warning signs, not painted notices, but the missing digits of your coworkers. One's short a thumb, another lost 2 fingertips. The veteran beside you can't recall what he's missing. It's been that long. Leather belts spin so fast they blur into philosophical abstractions. Get too close, and your sleevened arm vanish in a blink. Victorian fabric offers no stretch, no mercy. If you feed raw material into the machine as instructed. Gears grind, pistons pump. Every clang feels like a threat. The whole thing shakes like it's held together by rust, prayer, and passive aggression. Someone might shout, "Watch your hands," or "Mind the gears." Helpful if you weren't already fully committed to bodily integrity. But the machines don't care about your commitment. They sense fear, and you're producing fear at industrial volume. Once your sleeve brushes a spinning cog, time slows. Your life flashes before your eyes, including memories you didn't know you had, like crying over a dropped sandwich. You yank your arm back just in time. A coworker gives a solemn nadouv past a dark rite of passage. You hear one machine is called the nibbler. You don't ask why. By noon, you understand why Victorian workers weren't sentimental about fingers. The machines wanted them more. Take a deep breath. Actually don't. Not in a Victorian factory. The air isn't air. It's a hostile entity, blend of dust, soot, steam, oil, vapor, and the essence of collective misery. From the moment you enter, your lungs file a complaint. Each inhale feels like swallowing gravel. Each exhale, a plea bargain with poor judgment. Breathing becomes tactical, not automatic. The atmosphere has texture. You see particles, cotton, lint in textile mills, metal dust in foundries, coal soot near steam engines that look one spark away from apocalyptic failure. Within minutes, your throat is parched, your eyes sting, your lungs feel like a neglected accordion. Victorian workers called this normal. Modern doctors would call it evacuate immediately, but your shift has just begun. Coughs echo like dying bears. Rattling wheezes sound like lawnmowers possessed. No one covers their mouth, everyone's too busy clinging to consciousness. If someone coughs up something solid, they'll sort it out with a priest later. The floor is sweltering. Steam heats everything to the temperature between a sauna and stew. You sweat instantly, and that sweat mixes with soot to form Victorian pasta, sticky, black film that never fully washes off. Your lungs grow heavier. The deeper you go, the worse it gets. By mid-morning, you're rationing oxygen like a monk. You've invented 3 new coughs. You're seeing shapes in the haze, maybe machines, maybe the foreman, maybe your will to live. Drifting away in visible form, no escape. Windows are sealed. Fresh air is a luxury for people not currently stewing in industrial grime. By midday, you don't need a diagnosis. You need a time machine. This isn't air. It's the Industrial Revolution's way of saying, go home. If you thought the air wanted you dead, wait for the soundtrack. Factory noise isn't background, it's psychological warfare. It doesn't echo, it invades. It rents space inside your skull. The moment you step in, sound hits like a brick. Machines roar, clank, grind, hiss, banger, symphony, so chaotic, even metal bands would say tone it down. It's not just loud, it's malicious. It doesn't fade, it becomes the wallpaper of your nightmares. Your ears try to fold shut. They consider resigning. They contemplate relocating to a quieter lobe. But there are no quiet zones, only zones that are louder or much louder. Talking, impossible. You must scream confessions just to be heard. Often, you're not. The machines drown out everything, including your inner monologue, which is currently shrieking. You try covering your ears, tilting your head, praying. Nothing helps. The noise drills into your bones. No earplugs here. The closest thing, cotton, which probably caused half the deafness. As hours drag on, your brain malfunctions. You hear patterns in the clanging, threatening Morse code. One piston chuckles. And that's when you realize the machines aren't just loud, they're mocking you. Your nerves fray, shoulders lock, sanity slips, time loses meaning, thoughts blur into one endless plea, silence. But the machines don't care. Fueled by steam, coal, and spite, they'll scream until your shift ends or civilization does. Victorian workers went deaf slowly. You're going deaf instantly and emotionally. By the first hour's end, you don't just crave silence. You crave vengeance. Just when you think machinery is the worst thing, here something darker appears. The supervisor. Victorian foremen weren't hired for kindness. They were selected for chronic misery, wall-piercing glares, and voices that slice through noise and hope alike. He materializes from steam like an underpaid phantom, rigid posture, bleak expression, eyebrows permanently set to "I'm disappointed in you." You don't know him but already feel indebted. His clothes are plain, dusty trousers, waistcoat, boots that have crushed dreams. But his aura, pure stress. Workers stiffen as he passes, moving like they've spotted a hurricane. He doesn't smile, doesn't blink, just judges. His encouragement, faster. His feedback, "You're doing it wrong." His empathy, "We don't pay you to think." He approaches like a predator, annoyed he must hunt. You try to look natural hard when surrounded by death machines. Sweat trickles, hands shake, eye contact fatal. That's how he smells fear when he finally speaks. It's not a greeting, it's a threat in question form. Is that the best you can do? Your soul briefly evacuates. He points at your machine and shouts, "None advice. Don't jam it. Keep it moving." You nod, though you don't know whose fault it is, when the machine decides it hates productivity and quits for fun around you. Veterans move, robotically terrified, but practiced. They know supervisors, spot weakness like sharks, smell blood. If someone slows even from injury, the foreman bellows, "Do you want to be replaced?" The answer is always yes, but the paycheck says no. You realize you could endure the noise, the dust, even the machines, but the supervisor, he's the true villain of the industrial age. You might think lunch is a chance to rest, regroup, maybe reclaim your will to live. In a Victorian factory, lunch is just the time you keep working. While chewing something barely edible, the bell rings your sacred window. Roughly 8 minutes, if the foreman's feeling generous. He never is. Machines don't stop. You don't stop. Only your hope pauses. Lunch, whatever fits in your pocket without melting. Fossilized bread, a cold, wrinkled potato, if lucky. A cheese wedge costing half your wages and smelling like chemical warfare. You blow dust off it and take a bite. Not delicious, but it has calories. That's enough. Instead, everyone hunches at their stations like goblins, eating while dodging moving parts that could turn lunch into an amputation. If your bread falls, you face a crisis. Pick it up. Leave it. Cry. Most grab it. Victorian 5-second rule means glance quickly to ensure rats didn't get it first. The noise drowns. Chewing sounds a blessing, since Victorian food makes no pleasing noises. Your jaw battles bread that doubles as building material. Dust drifts into your meal. Adding a crunch no recipe endorses. Someone might try a joke or weary smile, but noise swallows it. Laughter's forbidden not by rule, but by environment. Any grin likely means oxygen deprivation. Just as your stomach registers food breaks over, the foreman thunders. Your soul crumples. 8 minutes gone, potato unfinished, jaw exhausted, spirit depleted. 10 more hours loom. Welcome to Victorian lunch. By afternoon, your energy isn't lit's vanished. Packed a bag and emigrated. Your body runs on instinct, dread, and potato molecules. Machines don't care. Foreman doesn't care. Time drags its feet just to watch you suffer. Arms ache from motions unchanged since dawn. Back feels like a Shakespearean tragedy. Legs tremble. Fingers numb, comforting and terrifying in a place where losing one is a minor inconvenience. This is when Victorian workers hit what historians call the afternoon slump, and you call final collapse. Eyelids droop, you sway not dancing, but negotiating surrender with gravity. Minutes stretch like hours. Hours feel like personal assaults. Your mind drifts, grassy meadow, quiet river, any decade but this one. Then your hand slips, you jolt. Awake reminded, the machine devours dreamers. Around you, others slump too, eyes glazed like overworked owls, faces pale from hunger. Some seem to commune with spirits out of sheer fatigue, but no one stops. They can't. The machine moves, so you move. Stopping means introducing your limbs to 19th century engineering. Your mind asks strange questions. How long have I been here? What is time? Will this ever end? You check the clock. You think 3 hours passed. It's been 7 minutes. Stomach growls. Spine compresses. Soul evaporates. But afternoon refuses to end. All you can do is keep working. Breathe lightly, the air's toxic, and hope the bell shows mercy. Spoiler, it won't, not for many. Many hours at some point when your spirit's fully vacated and your muscles run on spite, you witness something chilling. No one reacts to injury. A man down the line catches his hand in a belt. A yelp, a blur. Suddenly, he's missing a finger. Just one. Not enough for a break. Not enough for sympathy. Not even paperwork. Paperwork only exists for bills you can't pay. He wraps the stump in a rag last washed during the Crimean War, mutters something unprintable, and keeps working. You stand shocked, clutching your intact hand. Surely this warrants pause. It doesn't. Victorian workers have 3 responses to injury: a grunt, an insult at the machine, and continued labor. Meanwhile, you stubbed your toe earlier and nearly filed for retirement. Another worker gets her hair caught in a gear. The machine snarls. She screams. The foreman yells, not from concern, but lost productivity. They cut her hair free, hand her a cap, and she returns like she merely spilled tea. You watch, stunned, a world where pain is just a scheduling nuisance. Burns are worse. Steam pipes hiss like furious G's. And life goes on because, in the Victorian factory, suffering isn't exceptional, it's the baseline. Workers respond to injuries in the only way they can: a sharp curse, a violent shake of the arm, then immediately returning to feed the machine. Stopping isn't an option. The machinery senses hesitation, then punishes it without mercy. Occasionally, someone is pulled in more seriously. The production line halts, but not for rescue. No one here has been trained in aid. They stop only for extraction. During this brief pause, this accidental reprieve, workers use the time to stretch stiff limbs, wipe soot from their brows, or steal a bite of the petrified bread they call lunch. It's the closest thing anyone gets to peace and the supervisor. His reaction ranges from mild irritation to utter boredom. He's witnessed too many mangled fingers to care. In fact, he often turns these moments into grim lessons. That's what happens when you lose focus, he mutters before barking back to work. That's when the horrifying truth strikes you. In this place, injuries aren't accidents. They're occupational features. Victorian workers built resilience. You You build panic, and the shift grinds on. It feels like you've labored through 14 lifetimes. The machines still roar. Your body clings together with sweat and delusion. Your soul, it abandoned you hours ago, relocating to a quiet cottage in rural France, where no one has ever heard of a loom. Then miraculously the bell rings. For one transcendent second, you feel something close to joy. The sound is shrill, metallic, brutal, but to your battered mind, it's Beethoven's Ninth. Relief floods your limbs. Your fingers unclench. Your spine uncoils a fraction. You smile for the first time since childhood. The shift is over. You survived. You're free. Or so you foolishly believe as you turn toward the exit, already dreaming of collapsing face first onto your straw mattress. A silhouette blocks the doorway. The supervisor stands like a Victorian eclipse. He clears his throat, the sound a man makes just before ruining your year. Overtime, he announces. Not a suggestion, not a negotiation, a decree. Your smile dies instantly, crumbling off your face like plaster from a condemned wall. Overtime isn't optional. It isn't paid. It's simply the universe whispering, "Congratulations. You thought you were done." How adorable. In the Victorian factory system, if the machines run, you run. If they demand more output, you surrender your boundaries. The bell that once sang freedom now feels like a cruel joke. You return to your station with the slumped posture of a medieval peasant marched to the stocks. Every part of you screams. Your knees wobble. Your wrists feel like molten candle wax. Your shoulders, gone. They now belong to history. Victorian workers rarely complained. They couldn't afford to. But you begin bargaining with the cosmos. If I survive this, you whisper, I'll never complain about Wi-Fi again. A bold promise, since your odds of survival are plummeting as fast as the air quality. The overtime drags. Light fades outside. Windows darken, though they offered little comfort to begin with. Your internal clock shatters. The only rhythm left is the machine's deadly pulse and the supervisor's occasional roar. Finally, after hours of uncompensated labor that certainly weren't in your imaginary contract, the bell rings again. This time, no one cheers. They simply shuffle out to numb for emotion. You walk toward the exit with one thought. If this is the best of all possible worlds, then Voltaire and a Victorian factory worker really needed to talk. When your shift truly ends, after enough hours to exhaust time itself, stagger from the factory like a ghost who died of overwork and is now confused about haunting protocol. Outside air should feel cleansing. But this is Victorian England. It mostly tastes like breathable coal. Still, it's better than the factory's toxic soup. Your legs are jelly not the elegant kind, but the lumpy, dubious variety Victorian children dreaded at Christmas. Every step sends shocks up your spine. Your feet throb inside shoes so soaked with street sludge they legally qualify as broth. The street is dark not from night, but from industrial gloom. Thick fog rolls in, carrying the stench of burning coal, rotting refuse, and someone coughing with apocalyptic intensity 3 blocks away. You inhale out of habit and instantly regret it when your lungs threaten to unionize. The walk home should be simple, but nothing in the Victorian era is simple. Cobblestones are slick, uneven, and seem to shift just to trip you. You clutch your coat tighter, though it offers warmth only in the abstract. Children walk beside you, children who also just finish 12-hour shifts. Their small bodies carry tools heavier than their dreams. A 6-year-old overtakes you, looking fresher than you do, and you feel a pang of shame. He's heading home to scrub floors after his 14-hour day. You're struggling to remain upright. Rats scurry past bold as ever. One locks eyes with you, and you swear it's judging your productivity. It probably had a more successful shift. It certainly looks cleaner. You pass polluted rivers, collapsed fences, overcrowded tenements, and the occasional man yelling at a chimney for reasons known only to him and his demons. Your body aches everywhere, arms like wet rope, throat burning, elbows throbbing. Yes, elbows can ache independently. And now you know why. Halfway home, you stop fantasizing about food or sleep. Those are luxuries for another lifetime. Now you dream only of sitting on anything, a stool, a crate, even a damp cabbage. You'd sit on gravel if it meant resting your legs, but you can't stop. If you do, the cold will seep in, and Victorian cold doesn't just chill you. It whispers promises of a long, peaceful nap from which you might not wake. By the time you reach your street, your soul has filed for bankruptcy. You've aged decades. Your shadow looks exhausted, and this is only day one. Victorians did this. Every day tomorrow, you'll want to stay in bed. Unfortunately, the bell won't care. You finally arrive at your home, or rather, the building where you temporarily store your body between shifts. Calling it a home is generous. Calling it structurally sound is optimistic. Calling it livable is pure fiction. What you return to is a cramped tenement room where privacy, comfort, and breathable air have all been sacrificed for efficiency. The moment you step inside, you're hit by the smell, a complex bouquet of damp wool, cold soot, boiled cabbage, and the faint, persistent odor of too many humans crammed into too little space. If bottled, it would be called despair. No. 5. Your room is tiny, so small that if you stretch your arms, you might accidentally become part of another family. Your bed is a pile of straw that crunches ominously, as if hiding secrets. Half of it is flattened by generations of collapsed workers. The other half has a suspicious lump you hope is straw, but fear is something older, something historical. You share this space with siblings, parents, cousins, or strangers who drifted in years ago and never left. Personal space is a myth. Everyone gets about a square foot considered luxurious. Since it's more than you had at the factory, conversation is impossible, not from noise, but exhaustion. The room hums with quiet groans, fitful coughs, and the soft scratching of a rat family in the corner who pay rent simply by refusing to leave. You try to wash up, but the communal basin holds water that gave up on cleanliness long ago. You splash your face anyway, hoping for revival. It only leaves you wet and disillusioned. Dinner is whatever you can afford, usually bread, thin soup, or something boiled so long it no longer remembers its original form. You eat mechanically, staring into middle distance, like a mind rebooting. As night falls, the room grows colder. You huddle under a blanket with the insulating power of a damp napkin. Someone snores, someone coughs, someone mutters in their sleep about the foreman You wonder how long your body can endure this before it simply refuses. And as you lie there, staring at the cracked ceiling, one thought drifts through your weary mind. If this is home, what exactly did hell look like? Now, here you are lying on your lumpy straw mattress, spine negotiating surrender, lungs packed with enough factory dust to qualify as a new mineral. You've survived your first Victorian workday. If we stretch the word survived to mean still technically breathing, but spiritually deceased, then yes. So, could you survive as a Victorian factory worker? Let's review. You woke to a bell that sounded like it took personal offense at your existence. You walked through streets where every puddle was a biohazard. You operated machines designed in an era when safety was considered witchcraft. You breathed air with the nutritional value of chimney residue. You ate lunch while dodging death dash by dash gear. You endured a supervisor whose hobbies included glaring and emotional demolition. You worked unpaid overtime you never agreed to. You trekked home through a landscape where the Industrial Revolution seemed to be losing a war with gravity. You sleep in a room so packed it could be marketed as human sardines. And tomorrow, you do it all again. Victorian factory workers weren't just tough, they were forged in suffering and necessity. Their bodies adapted to noise, filth, hunger, danger, and the total absence of weekends, minimum wage, or basic rights. They didn't thrive, they endured. Endurance was the only metric that mattered. Modern humans, by contrast, struggle with slow Wi-Fi, lukewarm coffee, and phone batteries under 20%. Imagine telling a Victorian worker that people today complain when their office chairs lack lumbar support. They'd stare at you, then at the chair, then ask politely what support even means. Let's be honest, your lungs would give out by noon. Your hearing would v your fingers. The machines want them more than you do. Your mental health evaporated the moment overtime was announced. Your will to live slipped away. During the third coughing fit, you would not survive a single day as a Victorian factory worker. And that's not an insult, it's a testament to how unimaginably hard their lives were, and how alien that level of endurance is to us now. They had no choice. You do, and you chose to watch this from a warm room on a comfortable device, sitting in a chair that almost certainly has lumbar support. Congratulations, you already live better than a Victorian factory worker did on their best day, before the scandal, before the Senate trembled, before Rome itself shuddered at the sound of drums in the dark. The Bacchanalia were gentle things. They began as whispered twilight gatherings among vineyards, where the air smelled of crushed grapes and sun-warmed earth. These rites came from Greece, carried quietly into Italy through the cult of Dionysus, later reshaped into the Roman worship of Bacchus. In those early years, participants were mostly women wives, widows, daughters seeking what rigid Roman society denied them: permission to feel something wild within themselves. Imagine it, a hillside beyond the city walls. Lanterns flicker in stone niches. Laurel leaves rustle in the breeze. A circle of women, dressed not in the stiff robes of Roman decorum, but in loose, flowing garments that allowed breath, movement, escape. At the center stands a simple wooden altar-rivet wind, crowned with grapes, holding a clay cup filled with the year's first wine. No frenzy yet, no shrieking, no chaos, only soft, singing, rhythmic steps. and a shared vow to honor Bacchus by stepping beyond the boundaries drawn by husbands, fathers, and lawmakers. For these women, the wine was never just wine. It was a key loosening of the social knots tied since birth. The Bacchanalia were meant to be moments of relief, rebirth, communion with a God who insisted joy was not sin, but divine necessity, and because the rites were private held far from the city, they became sacred. Men were not permitted in the earliest gatherings. The secrecy wasn't sinister, it was protection. But in Rome, secrecy always bred suspicion. These twilight rituals took root because they answered a need Rome refused to acknowledge: the desire to be unbound, to step away from duty and discipline, and into something softer, stranger, more ancient than marble columns and military parades. When the wine flowed and the songs pulled women into deeper rhythms, something stirred within them, a sense of union with Bacchus himself, not as a god of drunken chaos, as later tales claimed, but as a liberator, a whisperer, a reminder that beneath the Roman facade, every soul still longed for the wilderness. From this quiet beginning, an unstoppable movement was born. As the Bacchanalia grew, so did their magnetism. What began as a sanctuary for women slowly opened to anyone crushed by Roman expectation. Curious young men, enslaved people yearning for equality, freedmen shunned by patrician circles, even a few daring nobles. The rites were no longer quiet twilight ceremonies. They became vibrant, pulsing nights where wine loosened limbs, drums shattered restraint, and every social boundary Rome held sacred dissolved into mist. To understand their appeal, picture Rome not as a city of marble but as a pressure cooker. Public life demanded discipline. Family life demanded obedience. Religion demanded rigidity. But the Bacchanalia, they demanded only surrender. Participants believed Bacchus spoke through ecstasy, through the trembling abandon that arrived when wine and rhythm merged. Those who attended said the god wasn't prayed to. He was felt, tasted on the tongue with every swallow. The rituals deepened. Torches lit forest clearings. Vines coiled around tree trunks like living serpents. Worshippers danced in spirals, movements growing wilder as night deepened. Some claimed their souls briefly left their bodies, joining Bacchus in a realm where mortal rules vanished. Others saw visions, vines bursting from earth, hoofed creatures dancing beside them, the god's shadow slipping between torchlight and darkness. Woven through it all was a dangerous, intoxicating idea. The Bacchanalia allowed participants to become more than they were. Slaves forgot their chains. Women forgot their duties. Men forgot the rigid cage of Roman masculinity. In those nights, they weren't defined by birth, wealth, or citizenship. They were simply humans in communion with a god who celebrated the very pleasures Rome pretended to fear. Of course, not everyone approved. Neighbors heard drumming long past midnight. Strangers whispered of strange convulsions and cries they couldn't explain. Rumors spread, some harmless, some lurid. But what truly frightened traditionalists was the growing belief that the Bacchanalia offered a liberation Rome could not provide. And the more people tasted that freedom, the more they returned. The rites were no longer just ceremonies, they were escape, rebellion, revelation, a doorway into a world Rome did not control them. Therefore, a world Rome would soon seek to destroy. To the uninitiated, a Bacchanalia appeared as madness. but within the circle. Madness was a language, a deliberate unraveling, meant to draw worshippers deeper into Bacchus' presence. It began with masks. Worshippers donned faces of satyrs, thorns, wild beasts, or exaggerated human expressions, smiles stretched too wide, eyes frozen in ecstatic delight. The mask freed them, hidden behind painted clay or carved wood. They shed the identity Rome forced upon them and became creatures of the wilderness, beings ruled not by logic but by instinct. Music guided the descent. Flutes pierced the night with restless melodies. Drums throbbed like a second heartbeat. Cymbals clashed in erratic bursts meant to jolt the senses awake. This wasn't orderly Roman procession music. This was sound designed to dissolve the boundary between self and spirit. Participants said, "You didn't hear it, you entered it." The rhythm swallowed thought, replacing it with something primal that demanded movement. And so they moved, spirals, leaps, trembling collapses, rising again in waves, each dancer feeding the frenzy of the next. Wine flowed without measure. But it was never just drink. It was sacrament. Each cup was a step closer to communion, loosening of the mind so the god could slip into the cracks. The Romans believed furedivan madness was possession. In the Bacchanalia, possession became the purpose. Worshippers sought the moment. They no longer danced but were danced, no longer sang but were sung through. For a few breaths, they ceased to be alone in their bodies. Something shared, something ancient passed through them. Animals sometimes joined goats, crowned with ivy. Small creatures released into the frenzy as living symbols of Bacchus' domain. Torches cast wild shadows, turning forests into stages, where reality grew thin and unreliable. At the rite's peak, some swore they felt claws, hooves, or vines brushing against them. Hallucinations, perhaps, or the mind's way of making sense of overwhelming sensation to Rome's conservative eyes. This was chaos, but within the circle it felt like truth. The masks allowed honesty without consequence. The music rewrote the boundaries of self. The wine opened a gate, and when all these converged, worshippers believed they touched not insanity, but liberation, a freedom Rome could neither grant nor revoke, and that freedom terrified the powerful. As the Bacchanalia spread, so did rumors. They were no longer described as worship or release, but as a boiling cauldron of forbidden desire. And to be fair, the line between spiritual and physical ecstasy did blur. This wasn't accidental. Bacchus was a god of dualities, creation and destruction, joy and madness, chastity and abandon. To worship him was to dwell in the liminal space between sacred and sensual. Within the circle, bodies moved free, unrestrained by Roman decorum. Hands brushed, breath mingled, limbs wove together as if the group shared a single pulse in that intimate dark shaped by wine, music, and beliefernary boundaries dissolved. Rome prized control, restraint, hierarchy. The Bacchanalia erased them. A slave could place a hand on a noble's shoulder without fear. A woman could reject marital silence and sing, shout, or embrace whom she chose. For participants, this wasn't scandal, it was liberation. To outsiders, it was dangerous. Stories spread of orgiastic frenzy of worshippers, losing themselves so completely they couldn't recall whom they touched until dawn. Some claimed men and women lay together beneath trees, guided not by lust alone, but by shared possession, the god moving through them all. Whether these tales were truth, exaggeration, or political slander is unknowable. What matters is that the Roman elite believed them, and belief transformed the Bacchanalia from private cult into public. Threata. Society built on discipline couldn't comprehend a ritual built on surrender. A society obsessed with hierarchy couldn't tolerate equality in ecstasy. A society terrified of disorder couldn't abide worship that looked like wild passion under a foreign god's gaze. Yet, for the worshippers, the sensual wasn't sinful, it was connection. They believed Bacchus dissolved loneliness. They believed he fused followers into a single ecstatic body. And in a world that rigidly separated people by class, gender, and duty, that unity felt like a miracle. This merging, this dangerous intimacy, was the spark that drew the Senate's full attention. As the Bacchanalia swelled, gatherings outgrew vineyards and forests. Some moved underground to grottos, abandoned storerooms, chambers carved into hillsides, where chants echoed like living spirits. These hidden spaces amplified the atmosphere. Air thick with incense, torchlight casting monstrous shadows, masks staring from darkness like spirits caught between worlds. Secrecy became the cult's L. Rome distrusted unsupervised gatherings, especially those where slaves and nobles mingled as equals to safeguard their rights. Bacchic followers took oaths of silence. New initiates swore never to reveal what happened once the torches were lit. Breaking that vow meant exile or worse, divine punishment. Some claimed Bacchus himself watched from the chamber's corners, ensuring loyalty through an unseen presence. Initiation was elaborate. A newcomer entered blindfolded, guided by hands of the faithful. Their first steps symbolized leaving Rome behind. They were offered wine, a pledge of trust, then led to touch sacred objects, vines, animal skins, ceremonial daggers, masks anointed with oil. Each represented a facet of Bacchus: life, wilderness, transformation, release. Only then was the blindfold removed, revealing a circle of masked, silent worshippers, ready to welcome them into ecstatic unity. This network of secret vows and hidden spaces created something Rome feared more than indulgence. UNITYA, unified group. Outside state control was dangerous, regardless of intent. The Bacchanalia had become a haven, not just for pleasure seekers, but for those disillusioned with Roman authority. Enslaved people dreaming of freedom, wives trapped in loveless marriages, outcasts seeking belonging. These chambers offered anonymity, equality, and the intoxicating thrill of stepping outside Rome's iron grip. But the deeper the secrecy, the wilder the rumors. Whispers of conspiracies, dark magic, poisonings, even political plots began to circulate. Most were unproven, much was slander. But perception mattered more than truth, and soon Rome's perception turned deadly. By the early 2nd century BCE, the Bacchanalia had outgrown Rome's tolerance. Exaggerated reports and outright fabrications wretched the Senate. Scenes of chaos, seduction, all-night frenzies, secret gatherings, numbering in the thousands. In a society obsessed with control, nothing was more terrifying than what it couldn't monitor. So Rome did what it always did: panicked. The turning point came when a former initiate, driven by fear or ambition, approached authorities with a tale that ignited wildfire. He claimed the Bacchanalia were no longer rites but breeding grounds for treason, murder, and moral decay. He insisted worshippers forged secret alliances, plotted against families, exchanged illicit vows, and committed crimes under the guise of divine frenzy. Whether he believed his own words is unclear. What's certain is the Senate seized them with desperate enthusiasm. This wasn't truly about immorality, it was about power. The Bacchanalia had become a parallel society where senators held no sway, where women wielded influence, where slaves and freemen mingled as equals, where individuals acted without deference to hierarchy that threatened the very architecture of Roman authority. And so the Senate declared a moral crisis. They portrayed the Bacchanalia as a contagion, a plague of hysteria infecting the city, endangering families, virtue, and the republic itself. The stability of the state became the rallying cry. Rhetoric swelled with increasing drama, accusations of human sacrifice, forced initiations, mass orgies, forged wills, and poisonings. Later writers, like Livy, exaggerated these tales into stories of absolute depravity, likely more propaganda than history. But propaganda thrives when fear already grips the public. Parents began forbidding their children from venturing out after dark. Husbands accused wives of secret involvement. Rumors rippled through markets and bathhouses, each story more lurid than the last. People whispered that Bacchus himself was rising against Rome, corrupting minds with wine and frenzy. For the Senate, this fear was useful. It granted them moral authority, justified tighter control, and paved the way for extreme measures. The Bacchanalia were no longer seen as religious rites. They were recast as an existential threat to Roman civilization itself. And once Rome branded something a threat, its destruction became inevitable. In 186 BCE, fear finally hardened into action. The Senate issued the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, one of the harshest religious crackdowns in Roman history. It declared the Bacchanalia illegal unless explicitly approved by the Stata Permission, almost never granted. Overnight, a festival once devoted to joy, ecstasy, and divine communion was transformed by decree into a capital crime. Rome, the great absorber of foreign gods, had found one it refused to adopt. The crackdown unfolded with chilling efficiency. Magistrates stormed grottos, vineyards, and private homes rumored to harbor hidden altars. Torches illuminated scenes of violent disruption, masks ripped from walls, sacred vines torn from ceilings, ceremonial drums crushed beneath soldiers. Boots. Worshippers who had gathered in peace were dragged into the streets in chains. Public examples of Rome's restored order. Some begged, some resisted, others remained eerily calm, still under the fading spell of Bacchus, whispering prayers as they were hauled away. The Senate framed this purge as purificational cleansing of moral pollution, but to the faithful it was nothing short of religious persecution. Trials were swift and often performative. Thousands were investigated. Many were executed, some hanged, others thrown from cliffs. Still others displayed in public as warnings to any who dared revive the rites. Women, once the heart of Bacchic worship, suffered especially harsh judgment. The state accused them of seducing men into treason, corrupting households, and sowing disorder beneath Rome's foundations. Their so-called moral weakness became Rome's convenient justification for oppression. Yet not all submitted. Many resisted, in quiet, defiant ways, hiding masks beneath floorboards, burying wine cups etched with ivy, memorizing hymns so no written trace remained. Some fled to the countryside, worshipping in secret, trusting that God would shield them. Others smuggled sacred objects to distant provinces where Roman oversight was thin. These scattered pockets of devotion kept the Bacchic spirit alive even as Rome declared it extinct. The Senate's victory was incomplete, and that frustrated them deeply. They could destroy altars, but not memory. They could punish bodies, but not faith. For a time, Rome appeared to reassert control. Official proclamations declared order restored, corruption cleansed, danger eliminated. But beneath that triumphant surface, something far more complex simmered. A wounded populace mourning the loss of a god who had offered them freedom. Rome had won militarily, but spiritually, emotionally, the battle had only just begun, and in the shadows, Bacchus waited. Despite Rome's aggressive campaign to erase the Bacchanalia, the cult did not vanish, it adapted. Suppression only sharpened its instinct for secrecy. What had once been vibrant festivals with torches and ecstatic song now became whispered rituals practiced by scattered believers who refused to abandon the God who had given them liberation. The Senate could outlaw gatherings, demolish altars, and execute leaders, but it could not kill longing. And longing was where Bacchus lived most strongly. Survivors carried what they could of the old rites into the hidden corners of daily life. A vine symbol carved inside a ring, a sprig of ivy tucked into a tunic, a quiet toast at dusk with head bowed whispering a prayer that once would have been shouted beneath the moon. Women, in particular, kept the cult alive within families. Some taught their daughters hymns disguised as lullabies. Others held private rites in shuttered rooms, using a single cup of wine and a handful of grapes in place of the grand feasts of earlier days. The music was gone. The frenzy had faded. But the devotion remained compressed, not broken. Beyond the city, the cult found more fertile ground. In the countryside, where Roman surveillance weakened and villagers clung to older gods, Bacchus was welcomed back without hesitation. Traveling merchants carried stories of persecution that recast Bacchus as an outlawed deity, one who understood suffering, resistance, and the hunger for freedom. This new interpretation only deepened the bond between God and follower. Bacchus was no longer just the patron of wine. He became a symbol of rebellion, a spiritual refuge for anyone living under the boot of Roman authority. Meanwhile, in Greece and southern Italy, where Dionysian worship predated Roman rule, the crackdown was largely ignored. Local communities continued their rites with subtle adjustments to avoid provoking officials. Over time, these surviving traditions blended with remnants of the original Bacchanalia. What emerged was a more restrained but enduring form of devotion, emphasizing theater, procession, and symbolic ecstasy over frenzied possession. The spirit of the cult remained alive. Even if the volume had been turned down, the Senate had expected obedience, not endurance. The continued survival of Bacchic worship proved something Rome always struggled to admit. People need spaces where society's rigid boundaries soften, where joy is not a luxury but a right, and where the divine is not distant but intimate. And as long as humans needed that, Bacchus would never truly vanish. In the centuries that followed, Rome changed, but Bacchus endured, not always in his wild, ancient form. Time softened him, reshaped him, dressed him in new rituals, new names, new expressions. Yet the core of the culta, desire for liberation, ecstasy, and union with a force greater than oneself, drifted into every corner of Mediterranean culture. The Bacchanalia may have been outlawed, but their spirit seeped through the cracks of civilization, like wine soaking into the grain of a wooden cup. As Rome expanded, it absorbed countless foreign traditions. And ironically, even the suppressed Bacchic rites evolved into socially acceptable festivals. Public celebrations, like the Liberalia, and dramatic performances, root. Actors wearing masks, once tools of Bacchic immersion, now trod the wooden stages of Roman theaters, evoking the same primal emotions, but under the respectable guise of art rather than religion. Into choreographed dances, ritual songs, and poetic odes to the vine. The state had tamed Bacchus but could not erase him, even in the rise of early Christianity. Echoes of Dionysian symbolism persisted. Wine remained a sacred element. Ritual communion drinking to experience divine presence mirrored the spiritual logic of the Bacchanalia far more than Roman senators would ever admit. The idea that the divine could enter the human body through ritual consumption was not new. Bacchic worshippers had practiced it centuries before. While the Church rejected the chaos associated with Bacchus, it inherited something deeper, the belief that spiritual transformation could be intimate, emotional, and embodied. In medieval Europe, the figure of Bacchus survived in art, poetry, and folklore. Painters revived him as a symbol of pleasure, rebellion, and the human craving for release from constraint. Renaissance scholars, rediscovering ancient texts, recast him as a complex deity, not merely the god of drunken excess, but a force of creativity, inspiration, and liberation. Writers described him as the divine spark that dissolves fear, awakens passion, and reveals truths hidden by ordinary life. Today, the name Bacchanalia has become shorthand for unrestrained celebration. But beneath the caricature lies a profound truth. The ancient worshippers were seeking more than wine or frenzy. They were seeking freedom, the right to feel deeply, to break free from imposed identities, to touch the divine without intermediaries. Rome silenced the drums, shattered the altars, scattered the worshippers, but the longing that gave birth to the Bacchanalia never died, and in that longing, Bacchus still lives. To step into an ancient Greek symposium was to cross an invisible threshold, one separating the ordinary world from a ritualized realm of wine, wit, and carefully curated chaos. The room itself, the andron, was designed for transformation. It was often the grandest chamber in the house, built with a raised threshold to signal that this was no casual gathering. Once you crossed it, you were no longer just a citizen, a friend, or a guest. You became part of a performanza, participant in a cultural engine that shaped politics, philosophy, and reputation. The space was intimate and symmetrical, with couches arranged along the walls so every man reclined facing the center. This wasn't an aesthetic choice, it was ideological. No one sat at the head, no one loomed above another. Reclining placed each man in a posture of relaxed vulnerability, equal before the cup, equal before the conversation. The floor often bore mosaics, dolphins, vines, satyrs. or spiraling geometric patterns meant to echo the swirling motion of wine mixing with water. Even the decoration whispered reminders of Dionysus, the god presiding quietly over all that would unfold. Ascetians, often enslaved, moved gracefully among guests, offering water for washing hands and garlands to crown their heads. These wreaths, made of ivy or roses, were not mere ornaments. They symbolized the softening of the mind, the reopening of emotion, the loosening of social tension. The symposium was not a place for stiff formality. It was a space where thoughts were meant to wander, where minds could bloom like flowers. Awakened by night air, at the heart of it all stood the crater, the great mixing bowl. No one drank unmixed wine. To do so was considered barbarica, surrender to madness, not philosophy. Instead, wine and water mingled in proportions chosen by the symposiarch, the evening's appointed master. His decision shaped the entire night, a weaker mix for thoughtful dialogue, a stronger one for playful banter or emotional honesty. His role was akin to a conductor guiding a symphony, except this orchestra played with words, glances, debates, and laughter. Behind closed doors, the symposium became a stage where reputations were forged, alliances strengthened, and ideas born. What began as drinking transformed into philosophy, politics, and poetry braided together into one long, glittering evening. If the symposium was a world unto itself, then the crater was its beating heart. Everything began there. The Greeks believed pure wine was dangerous, liquid capable of unraveling reason and stripping away humanity. Only barbarians drank it undiluted. Civilized men mixed theirs with water, practicing a ritual of balance that blended pleasure with restraint. In this simple act, they expressed a philosophy: too little wine, and the mind remained stiff; too much, and it dissolved into ruin. The perfect ratio created clarity, inspiration, and the sweet elasticity of thought. The symposiarch determined that ratio. Sometimes he chose a gentle blend, 3 parts water to 1 part wine, for evenings devoted to slow conversation or political strategy. Other nights demanded boldness, a stronger mix, perhaps to 2-1, heightening emotional honesty, sharpening humor, even encouraging friendly rivalry. His judgment shaped the night's entire mood. A heavy-handed host could send the room spiraling into chaos. A wise one guided it toward harmony. Once mixed, the wine traveled from crater to cup in a choreography performed by attendants. The Oinachuafen, a young servant, poured the diluted wine into elegant silver or terracotta cups known as kylix. These cups were intentionally shallow and wide, so each sip required a deliberate tilt of the wrist, a reminder to drink intentionally, not mindlessly. Many kylix hid small paintings at the bottom, often playful or erotic scenes, revealed only when the wine thinned, sparking laughter or commentary. Even the drinking vessels became part of the entertainment. But moderation wasn't just physical control. It was moral and intellectual. The Greeks believed the best conversations emerged when the mind floated just above, sobriety loosened but not lost. Ideas needed warmth, not wildfire. In this delicate state, poets recited verses with sharp grace. Philosophers posed questions that danced between logic and metaphor. Friends confessed secrets, debated virtues, or challenged each other with riddles. The right wine ratio opened doors in the mind that daylight could not touch. Thus, the act of mixing became a ritual of self-mastery, affirming that the symposium was not a drunken revel, but a disciplined engagement with pleasure. It encoded the Greek belief that wisdom thrives between extremes, between dryness and drunkenness, silence and song, restraint and release in the crater's swirling currents. The Greeks found the perfect metaphor for their culture, refined, deliberate, and always seeking balance. The symposium did not begin with drinking. It began with positioning. Reclining on cushioned couches wasn't laziness. Sit was a posture of equality and openness. Lying on the left elbow, feet stretched toward the wall, guests formed a loose ring around the room. This posture softened the rigid lines of everyday Greek life. Standing meant authority. Sitting meant business. But reclining meant you were ready to think, feel, speak, and listen without the weight of formality pressing into your spine. It signaled that the evening would unfold not as a hierarchy, but as a shared experience. Once settled, each participant received a garland of flowers or evia, symbolic nod to Dionysus, divine patron of both wine and inspiration. Guests might anoint themselves with perfumed oils, myrrh, cinnamon, or rose to elevate the senses and set the tone in this environment. The mind was primed for transformation long before the first cup touched the lips. Conversation began lightly playful, teasing tales of minor adventures, comments on the day's events. But as wine slowly entered the bloodstream, talk deepened. The symposium was a theater of intellect, and conversation was its central performance. A good guest brought clever remarks, stories, questions, and a willingness to engage without hostility. Insults were permitted, but only artful ones. Wit was prized, vulgarity was scorned. The entire evening balanced seriousness and humor, logic and emotion. Philosophical discussion thrived here more than anywhere else in Greek society. Politics, poetry, virtue, justice, beauty. Nothing was too lofty or too delicate for the symposium's smoky air. The room became an arena where ideas clashed and merged like waves in a harbor. Men challenged each other not to dominate, but to demonstrate agility of thought. A well-timed argument could inspire admiration. A clumsy one invited ridicule. Yet even mockery was woven into the ritual, offered in good humor, not cruelty. Music accompanied the flow of words. A lyre passed from hand to hand. Someone hummed a verse of Homer. Another improvised a poem on the spot. The boundaries between performance and conversation blurred until the evening felt less like a discussion and more like a dance. Each voice stepped rhythmically into the next, reclining, conversing, singing, debating. These were not casual amusements. They were the building blocks of Greek identity, teaching men how to think together, laugh together, and explore the world through shared imagination. No symposium was complete without games, and none was more beloved or more delightfully absurd than Kottatabos. To the uninitiated, it looked like drunken aimlessness, men flicking dregs of wine across the room with dramatic flair. But to those within symposium culture, Kottatabos was a test of precision, poise, and charm. It transformed the last drops of wine into a weapon of competition, turning leisure into art. The game worked like this. After finishing most of his wine, a guest would swirl the dregs in his cup. Then, reclining sideways, he'd flick his wrist in a smooth arc, sending the droplets flying toward a target. Often a small bronze disc balanced atop a pole, or a basin designed to ring like a bell when struck. The goal wasn't brute force, but elegance. A proper throw required control, grace, and timing, especially since the player was half reclined and usually half drunk. A successful strike sent the disc clattering to the floor to cheers or groans from onlookers. But Kotobos was more than a game. It was a ritual of flirtation and theatricality. Every throw was dedicated to someone, a lover, a crush, a hopeful conquest. The player would name their chosen beloved, sometimes loudly, sometimes shyly. If he hit the target, it was seen as a good omen for that romance. In this way, the symposium became a small stage where desire was performed publicly but safely. A man could confess affection under the guise of competition, letting the gods of chance and wine judge his fate. The room filled with laughter as men exaggerated their techniques, claiming divine inspiration or blaming Dionysus when their aim faltered. Bets were placed, bragging rights earned. Some elevated Kotobos into near-athletic ritual, insisting they practiced sober throws at home to perfect their symposium performances. Others turned it into comic display, intentionally overacting their failures for entertainment. The game could ease tension, spark rivalry, or ignite conversation, exactly what a good symposium was designed to do. Even losers gained something: attention. In a culture where wit and charm mattered as much as skill, a clever excuse or dramatic failure could be more memorable than a perfect throw. Kotobos rewarded personality as much as precision, turning the symposium into an arena of playful competition, binding guests through joy, mischief, and the shared absurdity of trying to impress one another with a flying drop of wine. It was philosophy's counterpart, the lighter half of the Greek spirit, where intellect paused just long enough to laugh. If wine was the fuel of the symposium, then music and poetry were its soul. Once conversation had warmed the room and laughter loosened the atmosphere, someone would inevitably reach for a lyre. The soft plucking of strings signaled a shift from debate and games to performance and reflection. Music was not background noise. It was an essential ingredient in transforming ordinary men into thinkers, dreamers, and storytellers. A symposium without music was like watered wine without the wine, technically functional, but spiritually empty. The lyre passed from hand to hand. Some played simple melodies. Others surprised the group with unexpected skill, revealing talents rarely shown in public life. The Greeks believed music could shape the logestin, emotional states, just as wine adjusted intellectual ones. A gentle tune could soothe heated arguments. A lively rhythm could reignite energy. A melancholy melody could unlock confessions and deep truths. Music guided the emotional current of the night, as surely as the symposiarch guided the wine. Poetry was equally central. Men recited passages from Homer or Hesiod, reminding themselves of heroic ideals and ancient legends. Others delivered clever, playful verses crafted to amuse or provoke. Some improvised entirely, weaving new stories on the spot, testing their creativity under the gaze of peers. Improvised poetry was especially respected. A man who could drink, think, and compose simultaneously earned admiration. The Greeks saw this as a gift from the musissa, spark of divine favor ignited by wine. and social harmony. But poetry did more than entertain. It bound the group together. Each recitation invited response critique, laughter, applause, or a counterpoem. Ideas passed from voice to voice like torches in a relay. Themes emerged: love, bravery, death, beauty, betrayal, virtue. Guests explored them with both sincerity and humor, slipping seamlessly between seriousness and play. This duality reflected the Greek worldview. Life was tragic and comic, noble and ridiculous, all at once. The symposium mirrored this balance perfectly. Sometimes performances turned intimate. A guest might recite a poem dedicated to a lover in the room disguising affection. Beneath metaphor, another might offer a lament for a lost friend. These moments gave depth to an evening otherwise filled with banter and games, reminding participants that wine was not only for laughter, but also for memory and mourning. Music and poetry transformed the symposium from a drinking party into a shared emotional landscape, one where inspiration could strike at any moment, and every guest helped shape the night's unfolding story. As the night deepened and the wine settled into that perfect space between clarity and haze, the symposium shifted into its most famous role, a crucible for ideas. This was the hour when conversations sharpened, laughter thinned into thoughtful silence, and the air thickened with questions that had no simple answers. Politics and philosophy were not dry subjects here. They were living creatures, wrestled with, teased, provoked, and sometimes serenaded into revealing their secrets. Politics often entered through a casual remark, a complaint about a magistrate, a rumor of war, a sly comment about a rival city-state. What began as gossip quickly expanded into the wider world. Athenian democracy, Spartan discipline, Persian ambition, Corinthian trade all swirled into conversation. Guests dissected policies, debated leaders, critiqued decisions with the boldness only wine could inspire. The symposium was a political classroom without consequences, a place to test ideas without fear of public backlash. Then came philosophy sweeping in like a cool wind from Mount Olympus. Someone posed a question, not a simple one, but the kind that pressed against the edges of human understanding. What is virtue? Is courage a matter of action or intention? Does the soul exist? And if so, where does it reside? What makes a life worth living? Guests leaned in, eyes alight. With curiosity, the symposium was the birthplace of countless philosophical pathways, some playful, some profound, some destined to echo through history. This was the world that gave us Socrates reclining on a couch, challenging companions with relentless logic. It was the world where Plato would later stage entire dialogues. The symposium turned thought into theater. Every man an actor, every argument a scene, every insight a plot twist. Participants disagreed fiercely, but rarely maliciously. A clever rebuttal drew applause. A flawed argument invited good-natured teasing. Truth-seeking was a shared performance, not a solitary pursuit. The beauty of symposium philosophy was its freedom. There were no rigid schools yet, no textbooks, no exams. Thought unfolded, naturally shaped by wine, friendship, and the slow-burning fire of curiosity. The Andron became a miniature universe, where the laws of the city loosened and the laws of reason tightened. By the time voices grew soft and eyelids heavy, men often left the symposium changed, not just entertained or relaxed, but mentally stretched, widened by the ideas exchanged in the glow of torchlight and silver cups. Wisdom in Greece wasn't born in temples or courts. It was born in rooms like these. Though symposia were officially gatherings for elite men, the reality was far more nuanced and far more interesting. Into this world of wine, poetry, and philosophical combat stepped women not as wives confined to domestic quarters, but as figures known for intellect, wit, and artistic mastery, the hetairai. These courtesans were nothing like the silent, sequestered wives of respectable households. They were educated, articulate, and often more intellectually engaged than many of the men they conversed with. Some, like Aspasia of Miletus, influenced statesmen and philosophers alike. Others composed poetry, played the lyre, and debated ethics with the same sharpness as their male counterparts. Their presence challenged the boundaries of the symposium, not by breaking rules, but by redefining them in their company. The line between entertainment and enlightenment blurred beautifully. The hetairai was not merely a companion for pleasure. She was a mirror, a muse, and sometimes a mentor reminding even the most self-assured philosopher that wisdom could wear a woman's face. And so, in the flickering light of the andron, amidst wine, music, and debate, the symposium revealed its deepest truth, that the pursuit of meaning is never solitary and that even in a world of rigid roles, spaces could open where minds met as equals, if only for a night, educated, charismatic, and often sharper in conversation than the men reclining beside them. Their presence shifted the entire social chemistry of the symposium, adding layers of intrigue, inspiration, and tension to the night. A hetairai could recite poetry, play the lyre, challenge philosophical arguments, and offer commentary so bold it could make even seasoned thinkers pause. Unlike respectable women confined to domestic quarters, she moved freely within male intellectual circles, navigating complex debates with grace, wit, and strategic insight. Men invited hetairai not merely for their beauty, though appearance mattered, but because their presence enlivened the room. They broke the monotony of all-male discourse and brought a playful, unpredictable spark that ignited new lines of thought. A sharp remark from a clever courtesan could deflate arrogance or redirect a stalled argument more effectively than any amount of wine. These women also wielded significant social power. A well-known hetairai carried connections across cities, households, and political factions. Her criticism, could influence a man's reputation more subtly than any speech delivered. In the public assembly, some became confidants to generals, lovers to philosophers, or muses to poets whose verses outlived entire city-states. Their role was never merely decorative, was transformative. They shaped the emotional and intellectual climate of the sigh. Beyond the hetairai, professional entertainers also played essential roles. Dancers, flute players, acrobats, and performers who brought spectacle to the night, blurring the line between ritual and theater. Their artistry added atmosphere, but also contrast. While philosophers debated the soul's immortality, a dancer's fluid motion reminded everyone that the body, too, held its own kind of truth. Crucially, the presence of hetairai created a space where desire, intellect, and social performance intertwined. They were not passive guests, but active participants who deeply understood the symposium's inner dynamics, how ideas, egos, and emotions blended into a single, shifting current. Their laughter could lift the room. Their silence could sharpen it. In this alchemy of presence, the symposium became more than a philosophical salon. It evolved into a living ecosystem where gender, intellect, and desire collided in ways that could reshape alliances, inspire art, or alter the course of a man's ambitions. Beneath all the laughter, debate, games, and seduction, the symposium remained a sacred ritual space quietly overseen by Dionysus himself. The Greeks did not view drinking as mere indulgence. It was a holy act. Wine was a divine gift from the god who blurred the boundaries between joy and madness, order and chaos, mortal and divine. And so every symposium began with a libation, a small offering of wine, poured onto the floor or into a dedicated vessel. This simple gesture reminded all present that the evening was not purely human. Dionysus watched. Dionysus listened. Dionysus judged. The ritual framed the entire gathering, urging guests to drink with intention, not excess, to let wine open their minds, not drown them. The Greeks believed Dionysus granted inspiration, the kind that could ignite poetry, sharpen philosophy, or even guide political strategy. A man who drank too much lost that divine spark and fell into foolishness. A man who drank wisely became, in a sense, a vessel for revelation. Paradoxically, moderation was the path to courting the god of ecstasy. Symbols of Dionysus adorned the andron, ivy garlands crowning guests' heads, painted kylix depicting satyrs tumbling through forests, mosaics of grapevines curling across the floor. These were not mere decorations, they were constant reminders that every guest walked a tightrope between discipline and excess. The symposium functioned as a controlled descent into Dionysian energia, refined, intellectual counterpart to the wild Bacchic rites, tailored for the elite. Even the evening's structure followed a ritual arc: libation, wine mixing, light conversation, music, games, then deeper dialogue as night deepened. Each stage mirrored the shifting states of consciousness. Dionysus governed. The god was not summoned with shrieking frenzy, but through laughter, performance, and vulnerability. The Greeks believed that truth, philosophical, emotional, or political, was often revealed only when masks loosened and inhibitions thinned. The symposium created the ideal atmosphere for such revelations. At times, religious themes entered the discussion directly. Myths were retold, dissected, and debated. Was Dionysus truly born twice? Did he bring madness as punishment or as liberation? Did wine free the mind, or merely expose its weaknesses? These questions mingled with the smoke of burning incense, drifting through the room as guests pondered the nature of divine influence. Ultimately, the symposium was a balancing act. It embraced a god associated with chaos but demanded structure. It invited ecstasy but insisted on intellect. It flirted with madness but never surrendered to it. In this delicate dance, the Greeks found a way to honor Dionysus without being devoured by him. When dawn crept over the horizon and the last kylix lay empty, the symposium did not truly end, it transformed. What happened within those rooms echoed far beyond the wine-stained floors of the andron. The symposium left indelible fingerprints on philosophy, politics, education, art, and even the way modern people gather to share ideas over food and drink. Its legacy stretches across centuries, shaping the very concept of intellectual community. The most visible inheritance lies in Greek philosophy. Many of the dialogues that define Western thought, especially those preserved by Plato, are set at symposia. The relaxed posture, the wine-induced openness, the interplay of humor and logic, these created conditions where bold ideas could surface. Concepts like the nature of love, the structure of the soul, and the pursuit of virtue were not forged in solemn temples. They were born among reclining friends, cups in hand, laughter swirling around profound questions. The idea that deep thinking thrives in social spaces, not just in solitude, comes straight from symposium culture. Equally enduring was its role in shaping political discourse. Greek citizens learned to argue, persuade, and critique in these rooms long before stepping into the assembly. The freedom to speak one's mind, so central to democratic life, was rehearsed in private before it unfolded in public. Here, men tested rhetorical skills, challenged norms, and sharpened their understanding of civic issues. The symposium taught them to listen as well as speak, a skill as vital today as it was in ancient Athens. The artistic legacy is just as rich. Vases depicting symposium scenes became iconic works of Greek pottery, capturing everything from elegant, reclining figures to mischievous satyrs and drunken revelry. These images provide historians with invaluable insights into clothing, furniture, hairstyles, and social customs. Music and poetry performed at symposia influenced genres that survived long after the Greek city-states fell. Even the image of the philosopher with a cup, thoughtful, reflective, slightly amused, remains a recognizable archetype. And what of modern culture? Dining together, drinking together, debating together, these practices, central to universities, salons, literary circles, and political gatherings, are direct descendants of symposium culture. The idea that a shared meal creates the perfect environment for honest conversation and creative thought is ancient Greek wisdom embedded in our daily lives. Whether around a dinner table, in a cafe, or at a quiet bar, people still recreate the essence of the symposium, mixing moderation with indulgence, intellect with laughter, friendship with inquiry. The Greeks believed wine revealed a person's truth, but they also believed truth needed companionship to flourish. The symposium honored both, and through its rituals of conversation, performance, and philosophical play, it built a foundation for intellectual life that still shapes how we think, meet, and share ideas today. The wine has long dried, the lyre strings have fallen silent, but the symposium lives on every time minds open over a shared cup. Apollodorus was born in Damascus at a moment when the city was more than a crossroads, it was a furnace of ideas. Traders from the Persian East passed through its gates, carrying not only silks and spices, but knowledge, irrigation techniques, stone-cutting traditions, and mathematical principles refined over centuries. Greek settlers brought their own architectural vocabulary, proportions, symmetry, and a belief that beauty was inseparable from geometry. And looming above both influences stood Rome, expanding relentlessly, hungry for talent wherever it could be found. Damascus did not merely absorb these cultures, it fused them into something entirely new. This was the world in which Apollo first opened his eyes. From an early age, he was surrounded by stone. Damascus was a city that built with confidence, its arches daring, its aqueducts precise, its temples a marriage of local craftsmanship and foreign inspiration. Young Apollodorus watched masons at work the way poets watch sunsets. He studied how water carved its path through engineered channels, and how Persian vaulting techniques allowed structures to rise higher with less material. For him, architecture was never mere construction. It was performance, calculation, and storytelling all at once. His earliest teachers were not philosophers in formal schools, but builders and craftsmen whose hands were calloused from shaping the physical world. They taught him how a single error in measurement could doom an entire structure, and how a well-designed arch could bear more weight than any army could carry. These lessons intertwined with Greek texts he devoured, treatises on mechanics, geometry, and the sacred proportions of temples. Damascus gave him access to knowledge from every direction, and he absorbed it all like dry stone drinking water by adolescence. Apollodorus had developed the rarest gift an architect can possess, the ability to imagine in 3 dimensions. He didn't just sketch buildings, he walked through them in his mind, tracing how light would fall at dawn, how crowds would move on festival days, how water would sound rushing through hidden channels. His mentors quickly realized they were no longer teaching a student. They were witnessing the rise of a prodigy. In a world where most architects served cities, Apollodorus dreamed of empires. Rome, with its endless appetite for monuments, roads, bridges, and forums, called to him like destiny. And though he didn't yet know it, his Syrian-Greek upbringing, steeped in Persian engineering traditions, would one day reshape the capital of the Roman world itself. When Apollodorus finally made his way westward, Rome was not simply a city. It was a construction site on the scale of a civilization. The Flavian dynasty had just completed the Colosseum. The Forum was a perpetual work in progress. Emperors competed to outdo their predecessors with larger, taller, and more technically demanding monuments. Rome devoured marble, swallowed stone, and burned through architects faster than most cities went through grain. Yet Rome was notoriously hostile to outsiders. Syrian Greek architects were not supposed to outshine Roman-born engineers. They were expected to obey, not innovate. But Apollodorus was not built for quiet competence. He walked into the capital with the confidence of a man who understood precisely what he could offer: designs Rome had never seen, techniques rooted in Persian and Near Eastern engineering, and a mathematical boldness that could push Roman architecture beyond its limits. Rome didn't need another draftsman. It needed a visionary, and Apollodorus stepped into that role effortlessly. He didn't begin with grand monuments. At first, his contributions were practical: improved bridge designs, more efficient military fortifications, and innovations in siege engine mechanics. Trajan, still a rising military commander, noticed immediately Apollodorus' solutions weren't theoretical. They worked in the field. Where other engineers hesitated, he calculated. Where others proposed, he executed. And where others accepted the limits of Roman building traditions, Apollodorus reached back into the engineering knowledge of Persia and the Hellenistic world, pulling out techniques Rome had never considered. This partnership, Trajan, the soldier, Apollodorus, the architect, became one of the most powerful alliances in Roman history. Trajan valued talent over pedigree. valued patrons who understood ambition. Together, they reshaped the empire not in marble forums, but on dusty frontiers where roads, bridges, and war machines meant survival. With each success, Apollodorus climbed higher in Trajan's circle. By the time Trajan ascended the imperial throne in 98 CE, Apollodorus was no longer just a gifted architect. He was the emperor's chief engineer, trusted advisor, and the man Trajan believed capable of turning imperial vision into enduring stone. In a city overflowing with talent, Apollodorus had not simply arrived, he had conquered. When Trajan became emperor, Rome gained more than a ruler, it gained a builder. And at the heart of this transformation stood Apollodorus, no longer merely an architect from Damascus, but the creative engine behind Rome's next great era. Trajan wanted monuments that spoke of power, efficiency, and legitimacy. Apollodorus wanted projects that stretched the limits of engineering. Their ambitions aligned perfectly. The first grand undertaking was infrastructure, roads, harbors, and above all, bridges. Rome's armies needed mobility, and Apollodorus provided it with a mastery that stunned even veteran commanders. His bridges were not simple crossings. They were strategic weapons forged from timber, stone, and mathematical ingenuity. None was more impressive than the bridge over the Danube, a structure so bold, so unapologetically monumental, it defied the natural barrier that had long protected Dacia from Rome. Built in record time and supported by massive stone piers, Apollodorus' Danube Bridge effectively erased a river from the map. For Trajan, it meant war. For Apollodorus, it meant immortality. But his contributions didn't stop at military feats. He crafted siege engines with improved accuracy and range, reimagined defensive fortifications, and refined artillery mechanisms that allowed Roman legions to take cities others could not reach. These were not theoretical designs, they were practical. Brutal tools forged from his deep understanding of geometry and physics, knowledge rooted in Persian and Hellenistic traditions far older than Rome itself. Trajan saw in Apollodorus someone who could give physical form to imperial ideology. Victory was no longer enough, that had to be seen, felt, monumentalized. Architecture became propaganda, and Apollodorus became the hand that carved Trajan's legacy into the skyline of the capital. This synergy, Trajan's military expansion and Apollodorus' architectural genius, reshaped Rome more deeply than any partnership since Augustus and Agrippa. Together, they built the infrastructure of conquest, the tools of war, and the monumental spaces that would later define Roman identity. Yet Apollodorus was not content with practical brilliance alone. He harbored a larger vision to create a monument so vast, so precise, and so symbolically powerful it would rewrite the architectural language of the empire. The opportunity came with Trajan's greatest military triumph, the defeat of Dacia. What Apollodorus created next would make even Rome gasp. If Rome was the capital of the world, then the Forum of Trajan was the capital of Rome. When commissioned to design it, Apollodorus wasn't asked to build a plaza. He was asked to redefine what an imperial public space could be. The result was a masterpiece of impossible scale, breathtaking coherence, and architectural intelligence, so advanced that modern engineers still marvel at it. Trajan defeated Dacia with military brilliance. Apollodorus commemorated that victory with stone geometry, and a vision that lifted the city into a new age. The chosen site was cramped and uneven, a massive ridge of land blocked expansion. Most architects would have compromised. Apollodorus simply removed the hill under his direction. Tens of thousands of workers carved away millions of cubic meters of earth and rock, an engineering feat rivaling any ancient wonder. Only once the land was leveled did the true project begin. A vast open courtyard surrounded by colonnades, a basilica larger than any yet built, libraries, statues, triumphal arches, and Trajan's column rising like a marble flame at its center. The proportions were deliberate. Apollodorus understood how Romans moved through space, how crowds flowed, how ceremonial processions required grandeur without confusion. The Forum of Trajan was not chaotic, it was choreographed. Each structure echoed another. The libraries flanking the column symbolized the emperor's wisdom. The Basilica Ulpia served as the empire's administrative heart, blending Greek aesthetic harmony with Roman legal authority. Even the colossal equestrian statue of Trajan gilded in bronze was positioned to be the first thing a visitor saw. Upon entering, a reminder that power and order radiated from the emperor himself. And then there was Trajan's column. Its spiraling relief told the story of the Dacian wars with a precision normally reserved for manuscripts. Soldiers crossing bridges, engineers building fortifications, generals addressing troops, all rendered with Apollodorus' intimate understanding of warfare and logistics. Some scholars believe he personally directed the narrative, using first-hand experience to shape Rome's visual memory of the conflict. But what truly made the Forum extraordinary was its fusion of traditions. Persian engineering, Greek symmetry, and Roman monumentalism were woven into a single architectural language. Apollodorus didn't copy cultures. He synthesized them, elevating each into something greater. His Forum was a city within a city, a physical argument for Rome's claim to universal rule in building it. Apollodorus reached the height of his influence, but heights in Rome were always dangerous. If the Forum of Trajan was a statement of imperial glory, then the markets of Trajan were a declaration of Apollodorus' genius. Attached to the Forum like a living organism, the markets sprawled across the slope of the Quirinal hill in tiered layers of brick, arches, and vaulted halls. But this was no simple commercial district. What Apollodorus built was arguably the world's first multifunctional shopping and administrative complexa structure, so advanced in design and so modern in concept it feels startlingly familiar. Today, the challenge was enormous. He had to tame a steep, irregular hillside and turn it into a harmonious, functioning space. Lesser architects would have fought the terrain. Apollodorus embraced it. He carved into the hill, creating massive retaining walls and staggered platforms that transformed a natural obstacle into architectural opportunity. Instead of resisting the land's shape, he sculpted it into a cascading network of levels that maximized usable space while ensuring structural stability. This principle, merging engineering necessity with elegant form, came straight from Near Eastern building traditions he absorbed in Damascus. The lower levels buzzed with activity. Food vendors, wine shops, spice dealers, textile merchants, and small booths selling everything from lamps to scrolls. These lined a broad street now called the Via Biberatica that wound through the complex like a spine. The street was shaded, airy, and perfectly engineered to move both goods and gossip efficiently. Apollodorus understood the flow of people, commerce, and Roman life, and he designed accordingly. Above the shops were offices, storage rooms, and administrative chambers. Roman bureaucrats worked in spaces that could have existed in a modern government building, bright, ventilated, and logically arranged. Upper terraces offered panoramic views of the newly completed forum, allowing merchants and officials alike to gaze out over Trajan's architectural crown jewel. The markets were not just commercial, they were political, social, and symbolic. But Apollodorus didn't rely solely on function. He infused beauty into every curve and corridor. Brickwork was laid with mathematical precision. Arches were framed to catch sunlight dramatically at certain hours. Semicircular halls created acoustics ideal for public announcements. Even the smallest details reflected his belief that engineering and aesthetics were two sides of the same coin. Rome had never seen anything like it. Visitors walked through the markets in not just because of what they could buy, but because the building itself felt like a living testament to imperial order and prosperity. Apollodorus had taken the mundane act of shopping and elevated it into a civic experience. The markets cemented his reputation as the empire's most innovative architect. But admiration was not universal. In a city steep before Apollodorus carved his vision into Rome's skyline, he carved it into the very mechanics of war. Trajan's Dacian campaigns were not won by soldiers alone, but by terrain mastery, logistical superiority, and engineering so advanced it rendered natural obstacles meaningless. Behind much of that engineering stood Apollodorus, wielding geometry as decisively as any general wielded a sword. The Danube River had long shielded Dacia like a moat. Most Roman commanders treated it as a seasonal nuisance crossable only with temporary pontoon bridges, always at the mercy of the current. Apollodorus, however, saw the Danube not as a barrier but as a solvable equation. His solution was the famed Danube Bridge, a structure of unprecedented scale, resting on colossal stone piers driven deep into the riverbed, stretching more than a kilometer across roaring water. It wasn't just a bridge. It was Rome declaring that even nature bowed before imperial will. Constructing it required synchronized brilliance. Divers sealed wooden caissons underwater. Masons shaped stone blocks to tolerances few believed possible. Timber specialists engineered an interlocking superstructure that resisted both current and ice. Apollodorus orchestrated them, all blending Roman resources with techniques inherited from Persian and Hellenistic hydraulic traditions. When complete, Rome marched armies across it as easily as a man stepping over a stream. Dacia had lost its greatest shield, but the bridge was only one part of his war genius. Apollodorus redesigned battering rams, siege towers, and ballistae, optimizing tension, trajectory, and stability. He introduced improvements to testudo formations by calculating ideal shield curvature. He refined artillery so Roman projectiles flew farther and struck harder. These innovations didn't merely assist the legions, they transformed them into a precision machine. Siege warfare, to bore his touch, at fortified Dacian hilltops, where steep slopes frustrated ordinary engineers. Apollodorus devised terracing systems and counterslope roads that allowed Roman siege towers to climb impossible gradients. Where others saw cliffs, he saw leverage. Where commanders hesitated, he pointed to mathematical solutions etched in the dirt. Trajan trusted him completely, often consulting Apollodorus during strategic planning, not because the architect worshipped war, but because he understood the structure of landscapes, of cities, of empires. In Apollodorus' eyes, a battlefield was simply a broken design waiting to be reconfigured. Victory in Dacia brought Trajan everlasting fame. It brought Apollodorus something else, a reputation so brilliant it would soon threaten the ego of another emperor. Apollodorus reached the height of his career under Trajan, but Rome was an empire where one man's rise could become another's threat. When Trajan died in 117 CE, the architect who had helped shape Rome's most expansive era found himself serving not by choice the new emperor, Hadrian. At first, the transition seemed smooth. Hadrian admired architecture, loved Greek culture, and wished to continue Trajan's legacy of monumental building. One might assume he and Apollodorus would form a natural creative partnership. But Hadrian was not Trajan. He was not a soldier emperor, but an aesthete, an intellectual deeply sensitive, and crucially, deeply insecure. Where Trajan valued Apollodorus' brilliance, Hadrian felt overshadowed by it. The emperor fancied himself an architect yet lacked the technical mastery Apollodorus wielded effortlessly. The Syrian Greek master did not soften his opinions. He corrected the emperor openly. He dismissed Hadrian's early design sketches as the work of an amateur, accurate, perhaps, but politically suicidal. One account, preserved in later sources, recounts that Hadrian proudly showed Apollodorus his design for a temple. Apollodorus reportedly replied with brutal honesty, "Be off and draw pumpkins. You know nothing about this." Whether literal or exaggerated, the moral is clear. Apollodorus embarrassed a man who could not afford to be embarrassed. Hadrian never forgot it. The first crack in their relationship appeared when Apollodorus criticized Hadrian's beloved architectural obsession, the rebuilding of the Pantheon. Though Hadrian oversaw the project, Apollodorus allegedly pointed out structural flaws and corrections the emperor had overlooked. The emperor seethed. Advisors warned Apollodorus to temper his tone, but he was not a court flatterer. He was a builder who spoke the truth, Stone demanded. When political tension finally erupted, it was swift and silent. Hadrian dismissed Apollodorus from all imperial projects, stripping him of access to the architectural heart of Rome. The man who once commanded armies of workers was suddenly unwelcome in the very city he helped reinvent. The Syrian Greek architect who had shaped the empire's greatest forum was exiled not for treason, not for corruption, but for brilliance perceived as insubordination. And exile was only the beginning. Hadrian's resentment simmered, deepening into paranoia. A man of Apollodorus' talent, influence, and uncompromising nature was too dangerous to leave alive. The empire he had built monuments for would soon turn those monuments into silent witnesses to his downfall. Once Apollodorus fell from Hadrian's favor, his world collapsed with terrifying speed. A man whose designs had reshaped Rome itself was suddenly uprooted, stripped of imperial protection, cast out from the circles of influence he once commanded. exile for an architect was not just physical removal from the capital. It was the severing of his hands from the stone that defined his identity. Now he wandered in enforced obscurity, carrying the bitter knowledge that his genius had become his greatest liability. Hadrian's motives were never officially declared. The emperor wrapped his decisions in vague political justifications, hinting that Apollodorus had overstepped his station, spoken too boldly, criticized too freely. But everyone close to the court knew the truth. In Rome, brilliance without deference was the deadliest sin of all. Everyone within the imperial court understood the truth. Hadrian could not bear a rival. Apollodorus was not merely an architect. He was a living symbol of Trajan's era, constant reminder that the empire had once been shaped by a vision far different from Hadrian's own. And Hadrian, who so desperately wished to be seen as an intellectual and creative equal to the great minds of antiquity, could not tolerate the presence of someone whose mastery so starkly revealed his own limitations. In exile, Apollodorus never stopped designing. He filled notebooks with ideas for structures that would never rise from the earth: harbors, triumphal arches, military engines, and hydraulic systems centuries ahead of their time. But no emperor would commission them. No workshop would bring them to life. His genius remained imprisoned behind walls of political spite, visible only to himself, echoing in silence. The end came quietly, yet with cold imperial calculation. Ancient sources claim Hadrian eventually ordered Apollodorus' execution, cloaking the act in a fabricated charge to preserve the illusion of justice. The exact method of his death remains unknown. The motive, however, is unmistakable. Hadrian did not simply want Apollodorus removed from Rome. He wanted him erased from memory itself. To a ruler who styled himself as philosopher, poet, and architect, the mere existence of a superior mind was an unbearable humiliation. And so, the greatest builder of Trajan's reign died far from the monuments he had given to the world. No inscription marked his grave. No column rose in his honor. The man who had carved a new Rome into being was granted only silence. Yet, even in death, Apollodorus defied erasure. His buildings remained immense, immovable, undeniable. The markets, the forum, the column, the bridges, they stood as stone witnesses, refusing to let his legacy vanish beneath the weight of imperial insecurity. Hadrian could exile the architect. He could silence his voice. He could even end his life. But he could not unbuild what Apollodorus had given to history. Apollodorus died without public honors, without a funeral, without the recognition his genius so richly deserved. Yet, in a twist of fate more poetic than any triumphal inscription, the very empire that sought to obliterate him ended up preserving being the only language he ever truly cared about: architecture. Rome may have scrubbed his name from statues and official records, but it could not erase the structures born from his mind. They still stand today, commanding the skyline, defying time, bearing the unmistakable fingerprints of a Syrian Greek genius who shaped the Roman world more profoundly than most emperors ever did. The Forum of Trajan remains one of the most extraordinary architectural achievements of antiquity, its scale unmatched, its planning unrivaled. The Basilica Ulpia became a blueprint for civic architecture across millennia. Trajan's column continues to spiral skyward in perfect balance, its spiraling reliefs offering historians not only a chronicle of war, but a window into Roman engineering, logistics, and military life, and the markets of Trajan. They endure as, in many ways, the prototype of the modern, urban, complex, multifunctional, interconnected, meticulously designed for the flow of people, goods, and ideas. Their principles of spatial organization, adaptive terracing, and integrated commerce remain foundational in urban planning to this day. Apollodor's influence crossed continents and centuries. Byzantine builders adopted his vaulted forms, Islamic architects, especially in regions near his Syrian homeland, code his mastery of domes, light, and fluid spatial progression. Renaissance masters studied his proportions, admired his clarity, and borrowed his engineering solutions.